Everyone watching Nigerian politics right now believes the same thing. Peter Obi is being hunted. The Labour Party has been judicially dismantled. The ADC coalition has been administratively suspended. The APC is offering him a deal that looks more like a cage than a door. And the May 10 deadline is closing every other exit. The narrative is clean. The victim is identified. The villain is implied. And almost everyone is wrong. Not wrong about the facts are documented. Not wrong about the mechanics are real. Wrong about something more fundamental. Who is in control of this story? Because there is a version of this sequence, documented, sourced, consistent with the public record, in which Peter Obi is not the man being cornered. He is the man who built the corner, stepped inside it, and is now waiting for the APC to walk in after him. A version in which the trap has two mouths, and the one that closes last belongs to Obi. This video does not claim that version is certain. It claims that version is more consistent with Peter Obi's documented behavior, his political track record, and the specific choices he has made in the last 6 months than the victim narrative that every other analyst is selling you. And AFRONEWSHQ is going to show you exactly why. Every other channel is telling you what is happening to Peter Obi. This channel is going to tell you what Peter Obi is doing. If that distinction sounds important to you, it is. Subscribe, because the part that comes next is the part nobody is brave enough to say out loud. The victim frame and why it does not fit the man. The victim narrative around Peter Obi rests on one implicit assumption, that Peter Obi is a passive subject in a story being written by more powerful actors, that the APC is the agent and Obi is the object, that the institutional forces being deployed against him, the courts, the INEC correspondence freeze, and the party suspensions, are things happening to him rather than things he is responding to with full strategic awareness. But Peter Obi is not a passive man. He is one of the most forensically careful political actors in Nigeria's Fourth Republic. As governor of Anambra State from 2006 to 2014, he operated in one of the most legally contested political environments in the country, surviving impeachment attempts, court-ordered reinstatements, and institutional hostility that would have ended most political careers. He did not survive those contests by being a victim. He survived them by turning institutional aggression into documented evidence of persecution and using that evidence to build public legitimacy that courts and rivals could not take away. The man who navigated Anambra's judiciary in 2006 is the same man navigating Nigeria's federal institutions in 2026. The approach is identical. Do not fight the institution directly. Document its behavior. Let the record accumulate. Then make the institution's conduct the story rather than your own vulnerability. The specific choices that do not fit a cornered man. A cornered man does not march publicly to INEC headquarters with 2 former presidential candidates and a national press corps. A cornered man files urgent applications in private and negotiates off-camera. A cornered man manages his exposure. Peter Obi on April 8, 2026 did the opposite of all three. He chose the most visible possible confrontation with the Electoral Commission in the company of the 2 figures whose presence makes the international optics most damaging for the government, at the time of day most convenient for evening broadcast coverage in Nigeria and international news cycles. That is not the behavior of a man running out of options. That is the behavior of a man who wants the confrontation documented, who needs the image, 3 former presidential candidates marching to the electoral body on the global record, who understands that the specific visual of democratic leaders walking on foot to an electoral commission in the style of a civil rights demonstration rather than a political press conference produces a category of international coverage that no government spokesperson can easily reframe. The April 8 march was not a desperate act. It was a production, and the director was not cornered. Peter Obi's media office has issued 5 separate public statements between April 1 and April 9, 2026.
Each statement follows the same structural pattern. It names a specific institutional actor, attributes a specific documented action to that actor, notes the specific legal or constitutional principle being violated, and closes with a statement of continued democratic commitment. That is not the language of a campaign in crisis. That is the language of a legal brief being written in public. We will return to what that linguistic pattern tells us about who is building a record and for what audience. The international human rights and democracy organizations that have issued statements on the ADC-INEC crisis since April 1 have all used language that is traceable in its specific framing to the press releases issued by Peter Obi's media office and the David Mark ADC legal team. The alignment between Obi's public communications and international civil society response is either a coincidence of shared democratic values or evidence that a communications architecture connecting domestic political messaging to international accountability bodies has been running in parallel with the legal battles. We will return to whether that architecture is reactive or prepared. 4 behaviors of a man who knows he's being watched. Behavior 1. He is building a legal archive, not mounting a legal defense. Every legal filing that the Peter Obi political network has shared since October 2024 shares a structural characteristic that is visible if you read the documents rather than the headlines. They are designed to lose in the short term and win in the long term. The applications are detailed, extensively documented, and accompanied by evidence that would be irrelevant if the goal was simply to win the immediate application. The goal, as any senior advocate reading these filings would observe, is to create a trail of documented judicial behavior, rulings that will be cited in a future proceeding before a higher court or an international body as evidence of systemic institutional bias against a specific candidate. This is the Anambra playbook at federal scale. In Anambra, Peter Obi did not merely contest his removal from office, he documented every procedural irregularity, every constitutional violation, every instance of institutional overreach, and then used that documentation to build the case that eventually restored him. The federal Supreme Court ruling in his favor was not won in the Supreme Court. It was prepared in every lower court filing that came before it. What is being filed today in the Federal High Court in Abuja is preparation for a proceeding that has not yet been announced.
Behavior 2. He's deliberately calibrating his visibility. Between October 2024 and February 2025, the period during which the Labour Party judicial crisis was at its most acute, Peter Obi maintained an unusually low public profile on domestic political matters. He gave international speeches, he engaged with economic and governance policy in public forums, he was visibly present in West African civil society conversations, but he was conspicuously absent from the Labour Party crisis in the Nigerian domestic media cycle. He allowed the Labour Party dispute to run its course without inserting himself as its central defender. That absence is analytically significant. A man fighting for his political survival attaches himself to every available platform. A man allowing an institution to discredit itself does not interrupt the process. Obi's restraint during the Labour Party crisis was not passivity, it was positioning. Every LP ruling that INEC has mishandled, every procedural step that has been documented as legally questionable, every court decision that sits in tension with INEC's own previous positions, all of it accumulates without Obi's fingerprints on it. The institution does the discrediting work. He arrives later as the alternative. Behavior 3. He is internationalizing faster than any previous Nigerian opposition candidate. In the 4 weeks since April 1, 2026, the Obi political team has achieved international coverage in the BBC, Reuters, the Financial Times, The Guardian, and Foreign Policy magazine. The framing in each of those outlets, democratic backsliding, electoral commission independence, opposition suppression, did not emerge spontaneously from foreign newsrooms. It emerged from a communications operation that placed specific sources, specific documents, and specific analytical frames in front of international editors at the specific moment when the INEC action made those frames most newsworthy. This matters for one reason that most domestic analysis has missed. International coverage does not merely inform foreign audiences. In Nigeria's specific institutional context, it constrains domestic institutional behavior. The Tinubu administration is acutely sensitive to international investor confidence, multilateral lending relationships, and bilateral diplomatic standing. A sustained international narrative of electoral suppression appearing in the Financial Times and Foreign Policy, not merely in opposition blogs, creates a cost for continued institutional aggression that has no domestic equivalent. Obi is not seeking international sympathy, he is building international leverage. International Coverage Tracker, BBC Africa. Nigerian opposition leaders march on Electoral Commission, April 9, 2026. Reuters. Nigerian opposition figures protest electoral body's party ban, April 8, 2026. Financial Times. Nigeria's ruling party tightens grip as opposition faces electoral hurdles, April 10, 2026. Foreign Policy. Is Nigeria heading toward a one-party rule? April 11, 2026. The Guardian. 3 presidential candidates walk to Electoral Commission in democratic protest, April 9, 2026. All 5 pieces cite the same documented sequence. All 5 were published within 72 hours of the April 8 march. Behavior 4. He has not touched the APC money. Multiple reports of APC contact with Obi allies have been published. None of them, not a single one across Business Day, People's Gazette or Premium Times has reported that money changed hands, that a written offer was tabled, or that any intermediary received a substantive response from the Obi side. The contacts have been reportedly made, they have been reportedly acknowledged, and they have been reportedly allowed to sit, neither accepted nor definitely closed. That posture is not the posture of a man who has rejected the offer. A definite rejection would close the story and remove the leverage. It is not the posture of a man considering the offer. A man considering the offer manages his public communications more carefully than Obi has. It is the posture of a man who wants the offer to remain open, documented, and reported, because an open, documented, reported APC offer to the obedient movement's candidate is the single most powerful piece of evidence for the narrative that the APC fears a free election. Every day the offer sits on the public record unanswered is a day the APC's institutional aggression is visible to every audience Obi needs to reach. The 4 behaviors, building a legal archive rather than a legal defense, calibrating visibility during the LP crisis, internationalizing faster than any previous opposition candidate, and leaving the APC offer open rather than closing it, do not individually prove that Obi is executing a counter-strategy rather than surviving a trap. They establish collectively this. Each behavior is more consistent with deliberate strategic agency than reactive crisis management. A man who is genuinely cornered does not internationalize with this precision, does not calibrate his domestic silence this carefully, does not manage his legal filings with this degree of long-term orientation. The pattern the evidence describes is not a victim. It is a strategist who needs to be perceived as a victim, because that perception is the strategy.
The case that the strategic agency reading is wrong. There is a serious and legitimate counter-argument that AFRONEWSHQ takes seriously. It runs as follows: attributing strategic genius to a politician who is losing institutional ground is a cognitive bias, not analysis. Humans are pattern recognition machines who find agency and intention in sequences that are sometimes just chaos and misfortune. The Anambra comparison is compelling, but does not account for scale. What worked in a state governorship context may not work against the full institutional apparatus of a federal government with more resources, more courts, and more levers than any Anambra governor ever faced. The specific weakness of the strategic agency reading is the May 10th deadline. A strategist can build a legal archive. A strategist can internationalize. A strategist can leave an offer open. But a strategist cannot run for president if he has no registered platform. And if the Federal High Court does not move before May 10th, the archive, the international coverage, and the open offer all become the legacy documentation of a candidacy that was structurally prevented, not the foundation of one that succeeded. The question the counter-argument poses is simple. What is the endgame? What does Obi actually do after May 10 if both institutional doors are closed? Where the counter-argument has a structural weakness. The counter-argument fails to account for one specific thing. Obi has never needed the conventional institutional pathway to build the political asset that makes him valuable. The obedient movement of 2023 was not produced by party machinery. It was produced by a citizen mobilization that bypassed the ADC, LP, PDP, and APC party structures simultaneously and delivered 11 million votes through social media, civil society networks, and diaspora funding. That asset, 11 million voters who will follow Obi onto any platform, does not expire on May 10th. It transfers. A man who carries 11 million votes into any party primary is not a man who gets absorbed. He is a man who transforms whatever he enters. The APC's calculation that it can absorb and neutralize Obi assumes that his value is attached to his platform, but his value is attached to his constituency, and his constituency, as the 2023 election documented, follows the man, not the party. If Obi enters the APC carrying 11 million obedient votes, he does not walk into a primary where he is neutralized. He walks into a primary where Tinubu's delegates face the single most consequential intra-party challenge in APC history. Here is the observation that columnist Dele Momodu made in his April 2026 Ovation column on the Obi APC question. Everyone is asking whether Obi will join the APC. Nobody is asking what happens to the APC if he does. That is the question this video is built around. Because the trap that is being described in most analysis of this story is a trap with only one exit, and the analysis assumes that exit is the APC's. What the evidence of Obi's behavior suggests is that he may be the only actor in this story who has identified the exit that points in the other direction. Drop a comment before we get to the next segment. Do you think Peter Obi is a victim being trapped or a strategist who is setting a counter-trap? I want your read before I give you the analysis that changes the answer. The APC's trap has teeth that point both ways. Every analysis of the APC-Obi dynamic has focused on what the APC gains if Obi joins, the neutralization of the most credible opposition identity in the 2027 election. What nobody has systematically analyzed is what the APC loses in the process of obtaining that gain, and what it loses if Obi joins and the strategy does not work as designed. Loss 1. The international narrative. The moment Obi walks into the APC, every piece of international coverage about democratic backsliding in Nigeria instantly becomes more complex. The Financial Times and Foreign Policy do not write the opposition suppression story when the opposition leader has voluntarily joined the ruling party. The international accountability pressure that Obi's current position generates and that is currently constraining the government's freedom of action on multiple institutional fronts disappears the moment he crosses the floor. But here is what replaces it, a different international story. Nigeria's most prominent opposition figure joins ruling party under duress is a headline that writes itself in every democratic governance publication that has been tracking this crisis. The coercion narrative does not end when Obi joins, it intensifies, with Obi himself as the evidence. Loss 2. The obedient constituency as an uncontrollable variable. The 11 million obedient voters are not APC voters, they are Obi voters. If Obi joins the APC and is denied the presidential ticket, those 11 million voters do not become APC voters. They become an organized, energized, internationally visible constituency with a documented grievance against the ruling party, inside the ruling party's primary process, with media access and civil society connections that most APC factions do not have. The APC does not absorb the obedient movement when it absorbs Obi, it imports it with all its organizational capacity and none of its loyalty. Loss 3. The primary itself becomes a legitimacy referendum. If Obi runs in an APC primary and loses, the conduct of that primary is subjected to the most scrutiny any Nigerian party primary has ever received, from domestic civil society, international observers, and the 11 million voters watching their candidate compete inside the machine that spent 2 years trying to eliminate him. Any irregularity in that primary, any delegate manipulation, any result that strains credibility becomes the story that defines the APC's internal democracy for the 2027 general election cycle. The government that suppressed the opposition then suppresses the opposition inside its own primary. That is not a comfortable narrative to manage while simultaneously seeking re-election. Obedient constituency durability. INEC 2023 results. Obi Labour Party, 6,101,533 votes, official figure. Independent surveys by NOI Polls and SBM Intelligence 2024. Obedient voter identification with Peter Obi personally rather than Labour Party averaged 71% across 3 separate polls. SBM Intelligence April 2025 report. The obedient constituency demonstrates unusually high candidate-specific loyalty rather than party-specific loyalty, a pattern more consistent with citizen movements than conventional party bases. Implication? The constituency is portable. It follows Obi, not his platform. The trap's real design. Obi as the APC's accountability anchor. Here is the perspective that no other analyst has articulated. What if Peter Obi's most dangerous move is not to stay outside the APC, but to enter it? Not because he expects to win the primary, because he expects to document what happens in the primary. Because the specific conduct of an APC primary in which the incumbent president's machinery faces a candidate with 11 million documented supporters produces a record, a legal, evidentiary, internationally witnessed record of exactly how the APC manages internal competition. And that record, combined with the 2 years of institutional behavior that preceded it, becomes the foundation of the most comprehensive accountability case against a Nigerian government since the transition to civilian rule in 1999. This is the version of the story in which Peter Obi is not the bait for a trap. He is the person who has constructed the trap, invited the APC to walk in, and is waiting to see whether they take the invitation. Whether they do or do not, the archive grows, the international coverage accumulates, the legitimacy question compounds, and the man at the center of it all emerges in every scenario with more documented evidence of institutional overreach than he arrived with.
Loss 2. The obedient constituency as an uncontrollable variable. The 11 million obedient voters are not APC voters. They are Obi voters. If Obi joins the APC and is denied the presidential ticket, those 11 million voters do not become APC voters. They become an organized, energized, internationally visible constituency with a documented grievance against the ruling party inside the ruling party's primary process, with media access and civil society connections that most APC factions do not have. The APC does not absorb the obedient movement when it absorbs Peter Obi. It imports it with all its organizational capacity and none of its loyalty. Loss 3. The primary itself becomes a legitimacy referendum. If Peter Obi runs in an APC primary and loses, the conduct of that primary is subjected to the most scrutiny any Nigerian party primary has ever received, from domestic civil society, international observers, and the 11 million voters watching their candidate compete inside the machine that spent 2 years trying to eliminate him. Any irregularity in that primary, any delegate manipulation, any result that strains credibility becomes the story that defines the APC's internal democracy for the 2027 general election cycle. The government that suppressed the opposition then suppresses the opposition inside its own primary. That is not a comfortable narrative to manage while simultaneously seeking re-election. Obedient constituency durability. INEC 2023. Results. Peter Obi, Labour Party, 6,101,533 votes. Official figure.
Independent surveys by NOI Polls and SBM Intelligence, 2024. Obedient voter identification with Peter Obi personally rather than Labour Party averaged 71% across 3 separate polls. SBM Intelligence, April 2025 report. The obedient constituency demonstrates unusually high candidate-specific rather than party-specific loyalty, a pattern more consistent with citizen movements than conventional party bases. Implication: the constituency is portable. It follows Obi, not his platform. The trap's real design. Obi as the APC's accountability anchor. Here is the perspective that no other analyst has articulated. What if Peter Obi's most dangerous move is not to stay outside the APC, but to enter it? Not because he expects to win the primary, because he expects to document what happens in the primary. Because the specific conduct of an APC primary in which the incumbent president's machinery faces a candidate with 11 million documented supporters produces a record, a legal, evidentiary, internationally witnessed record of exactly how the APC manages internal competition. And that record, combined with the 2 years of institutional behavior that preceded it, becomes the foundation of the most comprehensive accountability case against a Nigerian government since the transition to civilian rule in 1999. This is the version of the story in which Peter Obi is not the bait for a trap. He is the person who has constructed the trap, invited the APC to walk in, and is waiting to see whether they take the invitation. Whether they do or do not, the archive grows, the international coverage accumulates, the legitimacy question compounds, and the man at the center of it all emerges in every scenario with more documented evidence of institutional overreach than he arrived with.
The most analytically significant implication of the APC's pursuit of Peter Obi is that it confirms something the APC would prefer not to confirm, that a free election in 2027 without institutional constraints on the opposition produces a result the ruling party is not confident of winning. You do not spend this much institutional capital, courts, INEC correspondence freezes, party suspensions, defection offers, on a candidate you are not afraid of. The architecture of suppression that has been deployed against Peter Obi since 2024 is the most detailed public acknowledgement available that in the APC's own internal assessment, he remains the candidate most likely to win a free vote, and every action taken to prevent that outcome is a piece of evidence that the person it targets can use in every court, every newsroom, and every voter conversation between now and 2027. The Endgame. 3 scenarios and which one the evidence favors. Scenario 1. Obi is genuinely cornered and accepts the APC deal. In this scenario, the institutional pressure is real, the May 10 deadline is fatal, and Obi calculates that a contested APC primary is better than no candidacy. He joins, the obedient movement fractures, the APC primary produces the result the ruling party designs. Obi becomes a cautionary tale about the limits of citizen movements against institutional power. This is the scenario the APC is designing for. It is the scenario most political analysts are treating as the default outcome. The evidence that supports it: the May 10 deadline is real. The institutional destruction of LP and ADC is real. No third-party alternative with the structural capacity to receive Obi's candidacy has emerged. The pressure is genuine and documented. The evidence against it: Obi's entire political history suggests he does not make the move his opponents are waiting for him to make. He makes the move they have not prepared for. Scenario 2. Obi refuses the APC, accepts exclusion, and builds for 2031. In this scenario, Obi declines the APC offer, allows May 10 to pass, and converts his exclusion into a 4-year accountability campaign that positions him as the most credible democratic opposition figure in Nigeria's institutional history by 2031. The international communications architecture Obi has built is more consistent with a long-game accountability campaign than with a short-term electoral fight. The legal filings are designed for appeals, not immediate relief. The visibility choices are designed for historical record, not cycle news. Scenario 3. The court rules before May 10 and the frame collapses. In this scenario, Justice M. Kanwite grants the ADC mandatory injunction before April 14. The convention happens. The LP-NWC case is separately resolved. The May 10 door opens. The entire architecture of institutional suppression is exposed as having failed at every level, in the courts, in the international press, in the obedient constituency's coherence. Obi runs. The 2027 election becomes the referendum it was always going to be. This is the scenario the APC is spending the most institutional energy to prevent. It is the scenario in which the trap's two-mouth design becomes visible to everyone, because the APC spent 2 years building a mechanism that the judiciary dismantled in a single ruling. The evidence for it, the Federal High Court's own jurisprudence on party governance, is more consistent with the ADC's arguments than INEC's April 1 position. INEC's own September 2025 sworn affidavit, as documented in AFRONEWSHQ's previous video, contradicts the legal basis for its April 1 action. The contradiction does not disappear because INEC chose to act. It reappears in every proceeding. The three scenarios are not equally likely. The evidence of Peter Obi's documented behavior is most consistent with Scenario 2, the long game accountability campaign, with Scenario 3 as the preferred outcome if the judiciary performs its constitutional function. Scenario 1, APC capitulation, is the least consistent with everything Peter Obi's political record demonstrates about how he responds to institutional aggression. The man who was removed from office in Anambra and came back through documented persistence is not the man who joins the institution that removed him. He is the man who documents the removal until the institution cannot sustain the cost of having done it. The APC's pursuit of Peter Obi resolves one question that was previously uncertain: the ruling party's own internal assessment of the 2027 electoral landscape. You do not spend this much capital, courts, INEC, international reputation, opposition party suspensions on a candidate you are confident of defeating in a free vote. The suppression architecture is the APC's most honest public statement about who they are most afraid of, and the person they are most afraid of is watching them build the case, document the evidence, and wait. We opened with an inversion. Peter Obi is not the victim, he is the bait. That inversion does not mean the institutional aggression against him is not real. It is. It does not mean the May 10th deadline is not dangerous. It is. It does not mean the APC strategy is not sophisticated. It is. It means that the man at the center of that strategy has a 20-year record of surviving institutional aggression by turning it into documented evidence, and that the specific behaviors he has exhibited since October 2024 are more consistent with deliberate strategic agency than with reactive crisis management. The trap that the APC believes it has built for Peter Obi is also, from a different angle, a trap that Peter Obi has built for the APC, because the APC cannot close its trap without confirming on the international record that it is afraid of a free election. It cannot absorb Obi without importing 11 million uncontrollable voters. It cannot win the primary without producing a result that becomes the most scrutinized democratic proceeding in Nigerian history. And it cannot walk away from the pursuit without acknowledging that it spent 2 years of institutional capital on a man it ultimately could not contain. That is not a position of strength. That is a trap with two mouths. Which mouth closes last depends on what Justice Nduite decides in the Federal High Court this week, on whether the international pressure accumulating around Nigeria's electoral institutions reaches the threshold that constrains INEC's freedom of action, on whether Peter Obi's patience outlasts the APC's confidence. AFRONEWSHQ will be at every step. You just heard the argument that nobody else is making about Peter Obi, not because it is the only argument, because it is the one that fits the evidence most closely. Make your own call. Share it. The comment section is where this analysis continues. AFRONEWSHQ. Nigeria deserves better thinking. See you in the next one.